It's a win for JayZ's team in the legal battle against Jane Doe. That's the woman who says JayZ raped her when she was only 13. JayZ's team is now one step closer to having that suit completely thrown out as a judge rules he can file an official request for dismissal. Jane Doe filed this lawsuit back in October, but JayZ's name wasn't attached to it until an amendment just last month. Since then, his team has been pretty vocal, both denying the allegations and then bombarding the court with motions. Let's start at the top, though, with a quick recap. All roads lead back to P. Diddy and the allegations against him, and so does this lawsuit. Jane Doe filed it just weeks after P. Diddy was indicted on federal sex crimes charges. We reported on this a lot at the time. That's when Houston-based attorney
appeared right here on Law & Crime, and during that interview, he made a major revelation. He told us that more than 1,000 accusers contacted his firm, saying they'd been sexually assaulted by P. Diddy at some point over the past 3 decades. During that same interview, Tony Busby told us there were other celebrities involved in these alleged sex crimes, and he said these suits plan to name drop in the future. So when Jane Doe initially filed the lawsuit, P. Diddy was the only celebrity she listed, but in December, she amended that paperwork to include one other name, Sean Carter. You probably know him as JayZ. Jane Doe says she was raped by both P. Diddy and JayZ in September of 2000. At that point, she was only 13 years old. According to her lawsuit, Jane Doe first met Diddy's limo driver outside of the MTV Video Music Awards in New York. The driver apparently told her that she fit what Diddy was looking for, so he invited her to an after party. Jane Doe says that this driver picked her up later that night and drove her to a large white house that was behind a gated fence. Once they were inside, Jane Doe was then forced to sign an NDA, but she says she never got a copy of that paperwork. According to her lawsuit, Jane Doe says she saw celebrities, drug use, and underage drinking all inside the
picked her up later that night and drove her to a large white house that was behind a gated fence. Once they were inside, Jane Doe was then forced to sign an NDA, but she says she never got a copy of that paperwork. According to her lawsuit, Jane Doe says she saw celebrities, drug use, and underage drinking all inside this party, and Jane Doe herself actually had a drink too. She later described it as a reddish-yellow mixture, and she said it tasted like orange juice mixed with cranberry juice and something bitter. Jane Doe says she started to feel woozy after having some of this drink, which she now believes was spiked by either P. Diddy or one of his associates. When she started to feel off, Jane Doe says she went to a room that she thought was empty but kept the door unlocked. Not long after, she says P. Diddy, JayZ, and a female celebrity who's listed as Celebrity B all came into the room. Jane Doe alleges that JayZ raped her first as Diddy.
JayZ's team followed up on the inconsistencies between Jane Doe's lawsuit and her interview and laid them all out in a motion. To start, Jane Doe says the night of the assault, she spoke with Good Charlotte singer Benji Madden about his tattoo of the Last Supper, because she has a religious background, so it was something to talk about. But according to JayZ's team, Benji Madden wasn't even in New York at the time of the 2000 VMAs. Instead, he was halfway across the country in the Midwest on tour with his band Good Charlotte. This same motion called out Jane Doe's alleged getaway from the party because her father apparently didn't pick her up. This is from JayZ's motion too, quote, "He," meaning Jane Doe's father, told NBC he was unaware of his daughter's assault allegation until the week he was interviewed. NBC reported that he has no recollection whatsoever of picking up plaintiff, meaning Jane Doe, on the night of the VMAs. And plaintiff and her father were living in Rochester at the time, which would have required her father to drive more than 5 hours from their home to pick her up on the night in question, an event that no father would forget if it actually happened. When pressed by NBC, plaintiff Jane Doe was forced to admit, "I've made some mistakes. I may have made a mistake in identity."
Get away from the party because her father apparently didn't pick her up. This is from JayZ's motion to quote he, meaning Jane Doe's father, told NBC he was unaware of his daughter's assault allegation until the week he was interviewed. NBC reported that he has no recollection whatsoever of picking up plaintiff, meaning Jane Doe, on the night of the VMAs, and plaintiff and her father were living in Rochester at the time, which would have required her father to drive more than 5 hours from their home. to pick her up on the night in question. An event that no father would forget if it actually happened. When pressed by NBC, plaintiff Jane Doe was forced to admit, "I've made some mistakes. I may have made a mistake in identifying not all the faces there are as clear, and even that she was guessing about key details, including the time it took to reach the venue. What is more, she admits she does not have a single corroborating witness over the last 20
records confirms that any such residence, to the extent it existed at the time, would have been located outside the territorial boundaries of New York City. In a separate motion, JayZ called for Jane Doe to reveal her true identity, and if not that, he wanted the lawsuit completely thrown out and dismissed. JayZ's team wrote, "Court should dismiss plaintiff's entire FAC and, at minimum, strike the allegations contained therein referencing Mr. Carter and dismiss him from this action." The judge shut down the request for Jane Doe's true identity to be revealed, at least for now, saying the court intends to revisit this decision at a future time. But in a new filing, JayZ actually got a win. The judge granted his request to file a motion to dismiss the case altogether. JayZ now has until February 6th to file a motion to dismiss. After that, Jane Doe has until February 28th to file an opposition. And if JayZ wants to respond to that, he has until March 14th. Now, I've got a lot of questions about JayZ's strategy and what's up his defense attorney's sleeve. And for that, we got to bring in law and crime legal analyst Julie Rendelman. So Julie, right from the
Jane Doe to reveal her true identity, and if not that he wanted the lawsuit completely thrown out and dismissed. JayZ's team wrote court should dismiss plaintiff's entire FAC and, at minimum, strike the allegations contained therein, referencing Mr. Carter, and dismiss him from this action. The judge shut down the request for Jane Doe's true identity to be revealed, at least for now, saying the court intends to revisit this decision at a future time. But in a new filing, JayZ actually got a win. The judge granted his request to file a motion to dismiss the case altogether. JayZ now has until February 6th to file a motion to dismiss. After that, Jane Doe has until February 28th to file an opposition, and if JayZ wants to respond to that, he has until March 14th. Now, I've got a lot of questions about JayZ's strategy and what's up his defense attorney's sleeve. And for that, we got to bring in law and crime legal analyst Julie Rendelman. So, Julie, right from the jump, is this a win for JayZ that he's now allowed to file this motion to dismiss? It is certainly a win compared to other law.
The time being, she would, and that was considered a loss on the part of JayZ's team. At the same time, they came out pretty strong with a PR strategy where they basically brought out all of the inconsistencies that the complaint had shown in terms of inconsistencies with her own father, inconsistencies in regards to potential witnesses. And so now they're at the next part of their strategy, which is to ask permission from the judge to file a motion to dismiss.
I want to talk about those inconsistencies because you're right. That's something that JayZ's team brought up, and it was pretty startling, at least to me. They pointed out the differences in Jane Doe's interview and then the filing that she originally had. There were some things that didn't add up. Some people she said were in New York. They weren't even in this New York. They were in the Midwest, all of these things. So does that make for a strong argument for JayZ's team to have this completely thrown out?
So remember, the basis for the moving for dismissal at this point is separate and apart from the inconsistencies. The inconsistencies that we're talking about are more what comes out at trial, in terms of the cross-examination of the witness and the viability that the complainant would be successful in winning a case against JayZ.
That the complaint had shown in terms of inconsistencies with her own father, inconsistencies in regards to potential witnesses, and so now they're at the next part of their strategy, which is to ask permission from the judge to file a motion to dismiss. I want to talk about those inconsistencies because you're right, that's something that JayZ's team brought up, and it was pretty startling, at least to me. They pointed out the differences in Jane Doe's interview and then the filing that she originally had. There were some things that didn't add up. Some people she said were in New York, they weren't even in this New York. They were in the Midwest, all these things, so does that. Make for a strong argument for JayZ's team to have this completely thrown out. So remember the basis for the moving for dismissal at this point is separate and apart from the inconsistencies. The inconsistencies that we're talking about are more what comes out at trial, in terms of the cross-examination of the witness and the viability that the complainant would be successful in winning a case. Again,
To say that there is no home that exists in New York in the area that she describes that would fit the description. So yes, that is another factor that they're going to bring up when they move for their motion to dismiss.
Hey, all you business owners or anyone hoping to start a side hustle, I want to take a quick second and tell you about something that can seriously level up your business game. It's Odoo.com and their incredible accounting app. You know how sometimes keeping track of finances can get messy and confusing or overwhelming? Odoo makes it super simple. With their accounting app, you can manage invoices, expenses, and even get financial reports all in one place. Take a look at this clean interface. It's designed to save you time and reduce headaches. You can automate those repetitive tasks, which means you'll just have more time to focus on what you really love, growing your business. So if you want to take control of your finances and make your accounting life a whole lot easier, check out Odoo's accounting app at our link odoo.com/LCnews33 and try Odoo for free today. So we have that. We know that JayZ's team is going to come forward with this motion, but then Jane Doe can respond. What would that look like?
So another great question. And I think, what Busby is going to be focusing on is what was the intent of that law? Was the intent of that law such that anyone who experienced some type of sexual criminal activity and was the victim thereof prior to December, therefore does not get the luxury of using that law. And so I think that's one of the arguments he's going to make. And then the second argument in regards to the inconsistencies is the ones that we expect. You don't expect someone to remember every single detail of what happened 20 something years ago. What you do expect is them to know the people that were involved and the crime that was committed against them. I think that is going to be a little tough because I do think JayZ's team has created and shown a ton of inconsistencies that one would expect someone to remember, especially if they're recalling a crime of this nature.
So let's say this does get completely thrown out and JayZ is no longer involved in this. What does that mean for P. Diddy? Because he's one of the defendants listed too. Would it be dismissed for just JayZ or altogether?
So one would assume that anything that JayZ's team brings up in terms of filing a motion to dismiss, P. Diddy's team will do the same. And so one would expect, if the facts are exactly the same as they are with regards to JayZ, that if it was dismissed in JayZ's case, it would be dismissed in P. Diddy's case. Quite frankly, I think Sean Puffy Combs has much more to deal with than this civil case. And so I don't think it's of the utmost importance to him.
You're right. P. Diddy kind of has a lot on his plate with a slew of civil lawsuits. And of course, we have those federal charges that are looming over his head. And JayZ, as of right now, only has this one suit that he is mentioned in. However, Tony Busby, you've talked about him a lot throughout this interview. He said that celebrities are involved in other lawsuits that he's planning to file eventually. Is it possible that JayZ could be named again in a different suit?
It is, and if you remember what happened with P. Diddy, when we first started to hear about these civil suits, do you remember there was almost an avalanche of civil suits that came after? JayZ has been a bit different. We heard about this lawsuit. I think some people were having an expectation maybe there were more to come, and there wasn't. That doesn't mean they're not going to come, but it does seem to have a different trajectory so far than it did with P. Diddy.
I'm wondering about the criminal side of things too. Just my hypothesis is that it's a bit different than P. Diddy. We saw that the feds had raided some of P. Diddy's places about 6 months before he was ever arrested. In this case, I haven't seen anything like that with JayZ. So what do you think on the criminal side of things? Are investigators even looking into him?
It's a great question with no easy answer. You know, anytime we know P Diddy and Jay Z were close friends. We know that they associated a lot together. But just because you're close friends with someone doesn't mean that you are also criminally responsible for their acts, or any acts for that matter. Could they be doing a separate investigation with regards to Jay Z? That's possible. I'm not sure though that Jane Doe, in this case, is going to be the catalyst that would push the feds to go after Jay-Z, where I think the complainants with regards to P. Diddy were much more substantial and had much more supporting and corroborating evidence of their victimization.
Bringing it back to Jane Doe, because she's really the reason that we're even here today to talk about this at all. JayZ's team does have some pretty strong points, the ones that you pointed out about the inconsistency in time, whether it was in New York, all of these different things that are going on. So it seems pretty strong to me. But for Jane Doe's side of things, do you think it's possible that the judge disagrees with JayZ and upholds this lawsuit and says it can move forward? Or do you think Jane Doe has a long road ahead?
I just don't know. It seems that the Jay-Z's team seems to be focused on the right issues, which is if that law came into existence after the September 2000 incident, then it arguably doesn't apply as long as there's been no other case law that established that it was in fact retroactive. I also think it's interesting, Sarah, when we talk about these cases, we have an expectation that a civil attorney, whether a civil or criminal, when they bring a case, that they know their case. And one of the concerns I think a lot of people have with regards to this case and regarding this civil attorney being Busby is that it almost seems like he didn't know. He didn't fully investigate the complainant. And I think you have to be really wary when you're coming forward with these cases, that you dot your I's and cross your T's.
You're right. Busby did come forward and say, "Oh, we might have made some errors, and it's because we were rushing to file." So it's interesting, especially in the fact that he says there's going to be hundreds of lawsuits. So to keep tabs on all of them and remember the timeline for every single one who was involved, you're right, that is kind of a huge undertaking. Talking about P. Diddy a bit more now, though, because he has those federal charges that he's facing, and now we're in 2025, so he'll go to trial this year in May. How do you feel about all of that? Do you think Jane Doe in this specific case, she could be involved, that she could testify, or should we probably see the other Jane Does or Kathy Ventura?
So I don't expect, and this is just a guess, that you're going to see this specific Jane Doe testifying, or quite frankly, anywhere near the federal prosecution of P. Diddy. You have to keep in mind the feds want an airtight case. They want the evidence that's corroborated. And the last thing they want is to bring in a potential complainant that is not going to hold up in cross examination. Because remember, if one complainant falls, a jury can start to say, well, does this impact and infest kind of what we feel about all the other evidence in the case? So my guess is you will not see anything regarding this complainant in P. Diddy's federal criminal trial.
The only thing I was really thinking about in regards to all that is that Jane Doe says this happened when she was 13, obviously under age 18, so she's a child. So if she's raped, that's child sexual assault, which is, an added layer. And this is something we've seen in allegations against P. Diddy, but we don't see any federal charges in the way of child sex crimes, just straight sex crimes. A lot of people are talking about a superseding indictment. Is that something you could see happening? Or, as you said, are the feds just hoping for an airtight case, just going for what they know that they have?
So another great question. It is not unusual for the feds prior to trial to supersede the indictment and add additional charges. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll be negotiating with the defense. And if they're not able to come to some type of plea, then they will in fact add additional charges. But again, they're not going to add additional charges unless they're confident in their complainants. And that brings up again the complainant with regards to JayZ, because I don't think, based on everything we know so far, and remember, we've only touched the surface, that she's going to be someone they want to take a risk on in regards to protecting their case.
So I have to ask for my last question here. JayZ, do you think that he has a strong enough case that the judge is going to rule with him, that it's actually going to be completely thrown out?
My guess is that even if the judge does not throw it out based on the motions that are going to be coming up, I think in February, I think this case is going to fall apart. I don't think we're ever going to see a trial because I don't believe, based on what we know so far, that the complainant is going to be able to hold up, whether it be for depositions or the like. I think it'll eventually be dropped.
Julia Rendelman, thank you so much for coming on and giving us some insight into these recent filings.
Thank you for having me, as always.
I think it's pretty safe to say we will be seeing this motion filed from JayZ's team sometime in the next month, so we'll keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, a quick reminder that no criminal charges have been filed against JayZ, and he's only mentioned in this one civil lawsuit. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.